Gaze up in New York City and you're instantly amazed. The towering buildings made of steel and glass reach high into the sky. The magic isn't just above. Down on the streets, there's a powerful energy, a bustling cultural scene. However, it's equally hard to miss the overflowing trash cans and the garbage bags. In fact, trash in this city is somewhat mesmerizing in its own sense. New York City makes about 44 million pounds of trash every day. That's enough to fill the entire One World Trade Center building in 3 months. But where does this much trash go? How much of it can we recycle? And how much of it actually is recycled? Why do some neighborhoods do better in recycling? What can we learn from them?
We're back to New York City, this time in downtown Manhattan. I have a very special guest, Unnati Akhouri. Hi Unnati, thanks for coming.
Hi Azadeh, thanks so much for having me here.
I love your analysis about recycling in New York City. And I'm actually so excited to see all the details of your analysis and I guess all the cool plots that you have made about recycling and composting and trash in general. Are you ready to show us your results?
Absolutely, I'm ready to talk trash.
Okay, let's go.
Let's go.
It's so exciting to talk about this topic because it's been for a while that I have been thinking about recycling across New York City because it's been a big problem as far as I could tell. As a resident here, we actually feel sometimes confused about what to recycle, what not to recycle. And my biggest question was always like, how important it is if I recycle in this city. Does it matter at all? Or is it more like a marginal effect overall? So that was the big question I had. And we started talking and you actually had other questions. Can you tell me more about what were the biggest questions in your mind that you wanted to tackle and find out the answers?
Yeah, I mean, to start off from where you finished, I guess our perspectives were a little different because obviously I'm not a resident in the city, but I have had the opportunity to live in different parts of the world. I grew up in India. I had, opportunities to live in Germany or Japan, UK, and then I finally moved to the US for my PhD. And like you mentioned, I came into the city. I actually landed in New York's airport, the JFK airport. And coming out, I see these beautiful buildings, right? I'm mesmerized. But I guess I was also a little taken aback by the trash bags, like big trash bags that I would see on the sidewalk, which I guess was, not something that I was expecting. And I think wherever I have lived throughout my life, I try to be close to the environment. I try to contribute to the environment that I'm in. And I think it was that awareness that made me notice this and made me notice that initial bit of the problem that, this is strange. Why is there so much trash lying on the sidewalk? And relatedly, again, since I'm not a resident, all the information I was gathering was from reading. I was curious about this. New York is one of the most populated cities, one of the biggest cities. So I started reading about, what's going on with the waste generation and the recycling system in New York. And I was very surprised to find that the recycling rates in New York are staggeringly low. And even if I compare that to, let's say, cities within the US, so I'm thinking Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, these were some cities that came up while I was reading.
And I'm curious, how do they compare?
I mean, they are about twice or thrice better than New York City at the recycling levels.
Wow, like, do we have any numbers showing what fraction of items are recyclable?
Yeah, so for example, for San Francisco, it's close to 65% of the waste that is getting recycled.
Oh, it's getting recycled?
Yeah.
65%?
They have achieved it.
Wow,
they have achieved.
That's high.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and that was very surprising for me because that's something that I was expecting would be the same for New York. You know, I would imagine that policies are the same.
And what was the number?
The number was 18%, well, hovering around 18 to 20%.
Really?
And when I say
Wow.
hovering, I mean for the past few years. And I think that caught my eye, I think. And that's the physicist, or I guess scientist in us, right? We sniff a question, we sniff this problem, and we're like, wait a minute, that seems a little odd. If it's in the same country, what is causing this huge difference? I would say that the first step in tackling any problem, well, first is curiosity, right? Like you need to sniff out what the problem is. But then it's really taking time in forming the question. There has to be, right? Like you're tackling some question that should be, to some extent, precise. You should be able to frame it in real world setting. Part of the problem, absolutely, frame your question. But the second part was look for good data. Find all the places you can get data. A lot of it is open, accessible, and available. And I think especially in the age that we're living in, right? Like data is becoming this resource. We have so much data that we need to become skilled or proficient or just comfortable with being like, okay, here's a question I have. How can I tackle it with data? What data do I need? Where are the possible places I could find it? NYC Open Data, by the way, for anyone listening or watching, is great. If you are interested in exploring data, they have data about everything. They have about trees, which I, by the way, got very interested in. I was like, maybe I do want to look at different types of trees in different districts. They have some data on trees. But for our purposes, there was extensive data on not just recycling in terms of, how much are people putting out for recycling, but also data on how much of that is actually getting recycled. From NYC Open Data, I collected the recycling part, but then we had additional questions about exploring, is there any effect or any association, relationships with other factors in the city? So for example, the infrastructure, the number of buildings, the number of bins, publicly accessible bins. I should add that collecting that data in itself is difficult because there isn't any one place that has, well-defined data of all the number of bins. So part of that was going to nyc.gov, and they have a PDF that compiles the address of each bin in each borough.
Oh.
So that was one other type of data that I had to collect. You then have your data for within each community district, how many bins of paper, or the other kind that is recycled in New York City is metal, glass, and plastic. And I should mention that because it's not intuitive, but metal, glass, and plastics are termed in one category.
How about the demographics data? I remember you actually searched for that and you wanted to learn more about different factors through that. So what did you find?
So thankfully for us, there is extensive data available on the socioeconomic demographics per community district within New York City. And, anything you want to look for, there is data on the proportion of male and female in the community district. I must add, this is for adults. They don't cover children when they're doing that, male, female. There's information about the median income per household in that district. There's information about the racial demographic, the ethnic demographic of that district. And that was very helpful for us because that allowed us to build this sort of nexus of, factors or parameters that can affect. I should add that as data scientists, we should be careful that, when you're finding data sets that can have associations or some relationships, that doesn't necessarily mean that we, conclude that, A causes B, right? But it's still good to understand if there is relationships between different variables or different factors. And that's really what we were after, trying to understand if there are factors that we can pull out that affect each other.
I'd like to emphasize on the fact that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. And this is a cliche that we data scientists and also scientists keep saying, but it's very important to acknowledge that, because then sometimes in the society, you see that people find correlations and quickly come to the conclusion that this causes that. But we see a lot of correlations that they don't necessarily mean one caused the other one. So this is a very important point.
Yeah, and I think we've been lucky in our case that we were able to narrow it down to asking some clear questions about, just one, right? That how is the waste generation and recycling differing by the districts? How has it changed over time? And are there features that affect the rates in different districts? I think along the way, we realized that we also have enough data to explore questions like, do policy changes make any difference?
One question that you really wanted to find the answer for during this project?
I think the main question, and I think of this as anytime I'm doing like a science problem, is so what, right? Like we did all this analysis or we looked at data, but so what? What do I do with it? What do I learn for the future? Because there's no point living in the past. Sure, we can learn from history, but you want to look to the future. And in our case, I think what I really wanted to understand was that if things stay the same or similar circumstances, will New York's recycling rate get better or not? Where are we headed towards? Can New York achieve recycling rates that are comparable to other cities, or can it meet its target?
Wonderful. So maybe we can go and take a look at the plots that you've made and all the cool analysis you've done.
Absolutely. Once we had all the data, I pretty much went in and tried to slice it in all the ways possible. And I think throughout this whole journey, that's the main lesson I have learned, that data is something that we get in this bulk, like it's this, a cube that we don't necessarily know what's inside, how to interpret it. And then we can come in with our questions and slice the cube in different ways and look at those cross sections and figure out what we can learn from that. I had read that San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles are really good at recycling. Independently, I knew of Seoul in South Korea as performing really well when it comes to recycling. And I wanted, for my own sake, to build a chart where I can visualize where does New York City lie. And this plot right here demonstrates that for us. So we see in the color-coded format that, the cities in pink are from Asia, In green are Europe, and then blue is North America. And if you were to read from top to bottom, you go, from continent to continent and different countries until at the very end you find New York City. This red dotted line, I've put that there intentionally because that's the actual value of New York City's recycling rate. This data for New York City is from 2023. What is lacking in New York City and what is causing such a low rate? To start with, you live in New York City, right? You're a resident, and this is a representation of what your trash bag looks like.
Okay.
So this is
interesting.
this is what's in residential trash, and it's been aggregated over a year. So I know that you don't throw out construction and textile every week, but this has been aggregated for over a year, and it's just showing you a representative figure of what is typically in the trash. And I would really like you to look at this section of the data, because food scraps, food soil, paper, so think like pizza boxes, and yard waste, so think like tree clippings, grass trimmings, and all that. This is organic stuff. So, and I really want you to keep that in mind, that over 1/3 of the trash is organics. DSNY currently collects all the municipality solid waste. So think residential waste, non-profits, school wastes. But when it comes to businesses, so all the restaurants that we have in New York City, but also all businesses, their waste that they produce is not collected by DSNY. So currently it's private haulers or carters who can be appointed by the companies to come and pick up the trash. Today we're going to focus on mostly municipality solid waste. There's about 2,000 pounds of waste that a household on average generates per year in New York City. Few questions that we can start exploring is the capture rate. Capture rate is the amount of recyclable items that are actually recycled. You should think of the word capture, like you captured it out of the waste stream. So this is a plot that shows the capture rates for the whole New York City. The boundaries that are being shown in this with this white line is the boundaries between the community districts. So we have Staten Island, Manhattan, Bronx, Queens, and then Brooklyn around here. And immediately a lot of things become apparent, right? Even if you don't look at the numbers over here, right? Even if we were to ignore the numbers, visually, we know that, okay, the redder it is, the worse the capture rate is, and the bluer it is, the better the capture rate. And you can notice that certain regions are performing in almost a clustered way. They're performing really well. And then there are certain clusters that are not performing as well. And now that we know that, okay, community districts differ by this much, what could be causing that? So for the same map, same city, same districts, this is the diversion rate. Diversion rate really is the waste that is being put out. So the waste that DSNY is collecting for recycling divided by the total waste that DSNY is collecting. But with this plot, I really want our viewers and anyone living in New York City to, recognize where you fall on this map, right? Mm-hmm. And recognize what are the ways that you could improve recycling, and also the ways in which you can reach out to policymakers or to the municipality about how recycling or recycling facilities could be improved. As I mentioned earlier, that we have data not just for the past 4 years, so COVID and post-COVID, we also have data for the past 10 years almost. So one, basic thing that I then went on to probe is, okay, the pictures we saw of the map right now was where the diversion rate and capture rate is at present, but how has this changed over the past years? as we discussed before, I wanted to understand and see if the data across the boroughs and community districts, so the data on the recycling and the waste generation has any relationships with the socioeconomic data of that district. So for example, here we have the refuse tons. So this would be the amount of waste that is being put out. And this is per person. So this has just been normalized for per person. And we're looking at that data versus the median household income. So this, for me, I chose these features or these parameters because I wanted to understand if income gives you maybe more accessibility to the amount of waste you create, or maybe not, right? This is what I wanted to understand, that how is having more resources affecting the amount of entropy that you're generating, so the amount of trash that you're generating. But one thing I would like to point out is up in this region, of course, we see a lot of noise, but something that is interesting is that as income is increasing, so I would like to bring your attention in this part, the amount of waste that is being generated per person is actually low. And that to me was very, very interesting. That high income, so I'm thinking from 100 up to $200,000 as a household income, that has substantially low refuse tons per person. One other thing that I found was really, interesting to me was looking at how the recycling rates vary for the median age within the community districts. So this is, the x-axis here is showing the median age of that community district. And again, on the y-axis, we have the diversion rate. And I interpret this plot as being one that is saying age all over the place. Recycling and age is all over the place, which is both promising and, for me, it was interesting because we often have this notion that maybe the younger generation is recycling more, or, these questions that we have in our head. I think for me, this was a clear indication of that recycling with ages just all over the place. I recognized that the racial demographics had some correlations. There was correlation with, as we saw, the median income in the neighborhood. There was some correlation also with the number of paper bins per person, public bins accessible to the people. So I realized that these are all, some preliminary factors that can affect the recycling rate. So I used a mathematical technique, a modeling technique that's readily available, and I really encourage students to give it a try. It's called linear regression. And qualitatively, I would just like to say that this tool allows you to recognize, okay, what are the set of parameters that could be affecting my data? It also demands that you recognize what data are you actually looking for. So that's recycling rate for us. And then allows you to be a little more concrete and be a little more mathematical at saying, how are these factors affecting my recycling rate? Using the same data that I had of the 10 years, I looked at how diversion rate has changed over this decade. And as you can notice that there's a clear almost separation of almost 10% in certain months between Bronx and Manhattan and Staten Island. And this already was interesting to me. Oh, I would also like to point out that this black dotted line that you see in the middle, that is the net, the average. So the data that we had seen at the beginning of our discussion, that was referring to this. So this is just showing the past on an average of the total diversion rate for New York City.
And then after 2024 January, I used a time series modeling technique that uses this past data and trains a model that can predict what will be the recycling rates in the future. It's promising that within error, it is able to predict, which gives us some confidence that this type of modeling, at least for the near future, can predict. But I think not so hopeful news is that we don't see it go up by a lot. We don't see the recycling rate go up.
Yeah, as we saw over years, it was almost, average was almost constant. So.
Yeah, average was constant. So unless we have, unless as residents, as people, we recognize that we can reach out to municipality and we can reach out to policymakers and demand for more, right? Because those are the only, if you think about numbers, those are the only sort of turning points that can change your trend. The Department of Sanitation in New York City had piloted a curbside composting program in Queens. And this was done in October 2022. So this is right at the tail end of COVID and lockdown and all of that. So I asked myself that we intuitively know that policy or some sort of big turning event can make the trend of your data change. But I wanted to see, is that really true? Is that possible? Can we see that? In blue, that's the Queens, the organic tons that are collected from Queens for composting. And in green, we're seeing Manhattan. One thing that, you had mentioned that during COVID, things were completely impacted, right? We see that here as well, that 2019, things are well, suddenly it plummets and we see this sort of almost a stagnant region. But if you notice around here, so think about in October, that's when Queens piloted the program. So they received the mandatory curbside collection. And we see that from that point, despite the impact of COVID, Queens starts to recover. And we see this trend. So for real, in front of our eyes, we see how maths can change, numbers can change if policy changes or if there are decisions made.
For Manhattan, it goes to the first quarter of 2024, and as we discussed, in the second quarter of 2025, composting became enforced in the city, and in Manhattan, also in buildings that with no composting bins, they started putting more composting bins. So if we collect data for 2025 and look back, we probably, that's the hypothesis, but we have to see and we have to test it, we probably will see an increase.
Yeah, and I mean, all of this goes on to say that the importance here is the fact that organic or compostable items make up such a big part of our trash. So this should be a motivation for people to recognize the potential of waste.
Can I just put the orange juice bottle in the recycle bin without rinsing it in New York City?
Ooh, well, yes and no. In most cases, you may be okay doing that depending on what type of bottle, what type of juice bottle it is. But generally, it's better to rinse. And one of the reasons being that if we throw items in the bin that has not been properly cleaned or is not of the correct type of plastic, then that can contaminate the whole recycling bin. And I'd like to bring your attention to this plot here that shows how the contamination rates have changed from 2005 up to 2023. There are tools available on Department of Sanitation's website where you can check whether you can throw items of a certain kind for recycling or whether it's trash or whether it's special items that need to be dropped off at certain locations. This is showing, for example, that the metal glass plastic, which was the contamination rate was 19.3, has now gone up to 27.5%. And that's a big jump in the amount of recycling that isn't even happening because it's contaminated. And similarly for paper, it's gone up from 5.1 to almost 15%. And, I will say I've been guilty of throwing away pizza cardboard boxes thinking that, oh, it's cardboard. I can just put it in the mixed cardboard pile.
But in fact, you can put it in the composting bins, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And I think since this is a New York specific story, I wanted to show that those numbers that I'm showing for contamination, what is causing that contamination? So for example, this is showing that out of that 15% contamination of paper, this is metal, glass, plastic is causing a good chunk. Food, yard waste, and soil paper, so my pizza boxes would fall in this category. Plastic films, which certainly, again, maybe in the past I've been guilty of, which is, often we have these cartons that have those thin plastic films on top. And throwing that, thinking that it's still paper, is maybe not a good idea.
How can we actually do better in recycling? Have you looked at the numbers at all?
Yeah, I mean, just based off of, Department of Sanitation does waste characterization studies, and they do mention over there what is the amount of items in the waste stream that can be diverted from the landfill. So this plot here is just showing what is the actual potential of, the percentage of waste that could be diverted from landfill. And this is where we're at right now.
Wow.
So there's potential for a lot to do. And, we went over some of it being organics. So this is, as you'd mentioned, the 36% organics that could be recycled. There's curbside recycling. So that's all of our paper and mixed cardboard, all of that. And this, I think of as the most hopeful plot. I know that this looks, maybe bad, but I see this as hopeful because I think there's potential for so much that can be achieved. So yeah, there's potential for 75% to be diverted.
That's very cool. So overall, I want to know, at the end of this analysis, what was your idea that from now actually will change maybe your own personal behavior, if any?
I think on a microscopic level, obviously, my behavior, day-to-day behavior, right? I think I've become more aware of the items I use and where I throw them, how I throw them. But I think also this journey of using data and these tools that are, openly available is so powerful. It made me realize that I can, moving forward, if I have questions about something, I don't need to be worried about how to analyze them. I have some tools with me with which I can start asking questions and start probing answers. So yeah, I think all in all, hopeful and feeling like I've accomplished a skill.
That's amazing. And you had a very interesting analogy that we talked about, mentioning black holes from physics. How does that black hole concept, or the general concept of black holes in the universe, make you think about this problem, make you think about trash and recycling?
Yeah, it's you can take a physicist out of physics. You can't take physics out of a physicist, right? So it's hard for me to not see these things as physics problems. And the black hole analogy was just, every time I think of garbage, I feel like we throw things into a garbage can thinking that, oh, it's just gone forever, lost into this ether and we'll never ever see it. And that kind of reminds me of a black hole. A lot of the times in physics, we think of black hole as this point in space where you throw things and it's lost forever. I don't care. I don't know. Well, physics tells me that you probably should care, because every time you throw something in a black hole, the size increases. You may have lost information, but the size of the black hole increases, and at some point it can engulf you. So similar to that, with trash, if we think of it as, oh, I'm just throwing it, it's gone. Nope, it's not gone. It's still on Earth and it's still affecting you, and that sphere with which, around which it's affecting people, that is growing. And we see that, right? We see that in the way changes are occurring around us, in climate, in environment, etc. And I see that parallel there. And I, for my own self, take that as a lesson to be aware and combat that. And I really hope people see that too, that trash can is a black hole and is not a black hole.
Amazing. Thank you so much.